Hebrews 12, I'm going to read verses 1 through 13. It's a great portion of Scripture. We're very familiar with the first couple of verses, but the rest of it kind of gives it its context. So the writer of Hebrews, now I oftentimes say Paul wrote it and didn't put his name on it because he was not viewed very favorably with the Jews. So he wrote this letter, did not put his name on it because it was to a Jewish population to stir their hearts. But I can't prove that, not interested in proving that, and all that. I'm just giving myself an excuse when I make the mistake of referring to him as the author. Okay, so verse 1 says, "Therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God." I'm just going to pause here because I want to bring something up that really has nothing to do with what I want to say, but I think it's really interesting. It says that we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. And we often think that there are people in heaven, right? Like, you know, okay, we got this group of people in heaven. But I think heaven's a lot more active than we really realize. And remember when Jesus was on the Mount of Transfiguration and Moses and Elijah met him there and talked with him? Talked with him about him going to Jerusalem. They were involved in his ministry. That we actually have a cloud of witnesses that aren't just spectators, but are involved. I don't know how, but it's important to them how we do. And it's important to them how we live. I think I have a grandma up there in the cloud of witnesses that is rooting for me and was rooting for me before she went home to be with the Lord, and I'm sure she's still engaged. I am not suggesting that they're watching you sleep at night and that they're visiting you in your bathroom in the mirror and stuff like that. I'm not suggesting that. It's a ministry that they're invested in. And I think we should be encouraged with that. Okay, and then it goes on, cast off the weights and the sins which hold us back in our race. And I've been saying lately, and I think it's true, God's not asking us to be perfect. He's asking us to want to be perfect. And that we go to him to help perfect us. So it's not, Lord, I'm not hiding my struggle. I have it, but I want you and I to work this out. That's what I want. And I'm willing to press in until we get this resolved if it takes the rest of my life. But I'm not going to excuse it, condone it, or say it's a part of the baggage that you intended for me to carry. But I'm not denying its reality. I want it dealt with. That's pleasing to the Lord because then his grace can come in and overcome that. So we're to recognize the weights and the sins that are involved in our lives, unpack them, and then we run with endurance the race that is set before us. So it's equated to as a race. And a race is fatiguing in a sense. You train for it, you run it, you're spending yourself, but then there's the prize at the end. So that's just the language that's being used. And then we look to Jesus, who not only is involved in our lives, but also ran his race too. And then verse 3, "For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls." So in other words, we look to how tough Jesus had it to encourage us. He really didn't die for us to be comfortable. He died for us to have meaning, to be effective, and to make a difference for the kingdom. Once in a while, we'll be comfortable, and once in a while, we won't be. But that is not the measuring stick on, am I in the will of God? It's my conversation with him that should put light on that. Verse 4, "You have not yet resisted to bloodshed, striving against sin." We know Jesus on the Garden of Gethsemane, the night he was betrayed, struggled and was pressed with yours and my sin to the point where he sweat drops of blood. And the writer here is saying that we haven't yet resisted. Apparently, that's an eternal word. Nobody has, nobody will. So he's saying, you don't have an excuse. Stay in the game. And you have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as to sons. And this is part of God's goal right here. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges every son whom he receives. If you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? But if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. So we're running a race, and part of the process of that race is to grow us up. So God asks us to do things that are uncomfortable and stretch us so that he can work in us sonship, sons and daughters, so we can be like his son. And that call to obedience is referred to as a chastening. So, and that's how you grow sons and daughters, right? You put weight on them, you put responsibilities on them, you let them fail, you let them pay the penalty for their failure of sorts. You know, you made your bed, now sleep in it. And then, as we get used to this, we grow up. That's what OSL is about. Operation Solid Lives, our discipleship intensive. It's intensive, and it's meant to bring you to the place where you recognize your frailty, so you seek the Lord and let him grow you up as a son and daughter. Is it a scary proposition? Yeah, it wouldn't be any good if it wasn't, right? It was about 2-3 weeks ago, we were in worship, and the whole time during worship, I was caught up in this daydream where I saw myself in downtown Madison preaching in open-air meetings. When I finally woke up, I'm like, that is not happening. I was there and I was getting heckled, and the Lord was moving and God was demonstrating himself, and I'm just thinking, where did that come from? I'm just wondering. I'm just ignoring it is what I'm doing. Verse 9, furthermore, we have had human fathers who corrected us, and we paid them respect. Shall we not much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? For they indeed for a few days chasten us as seemed best to them, but he for our profit, that we may be partakers of his holiness. Holiness is important. And I've not heard a lot about it, but I've not heard it personally. That's not really true. I've actually talked with pastors that make huge concessions for poor behaviors, referring to the fact that God's grace covers it. God's grace covers our imperfections as we struggle forward into the finished work that Jesus laid hold of us. Paul says, you know, I laid hold of him for that which he has laid hold of me, to be perfected and strengthened. So, and he says, no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Therefore, strengthen the hands which hang down and the feeble knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be dislocated, but rather be healed. Amen. Yeah. And then he just continues, pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. So we're asked to live a holy lives as we live a peaceable life, so that people can see the distinction and then be drawn to the Lord. Okay. So I said all that to say we're in a race. God is perfecting us. He's doing something significant, and how we live, what we do matters. And then I just want to propose that in this environment, we are in a time where we're going to see rapid change take place. Changes are coming at you, whether you're ready for them or not. I'll say, you may not be ready to change lanes in the walk of your life, but the road's going to shift on you, and you'll find yourself in a changed lane. It's going to happen. And that's okay. We want to be light on our feet and have the Lord help us out.